Welcome back to Shifting Views with Willis, with me, Wayne Willis. Today we are shifting views on global connection, volunteering, and the real meaning of a sustainable impact. Can we truly understand, empathise, and help global communities if we don't personally experience their environment? My guest today is Kimberly Haley-Coleman, the founder and CEO of Globalware, a non-profit organisation that designs hands-on volunteer experiences at countries across the globe. Globalware challenges the old notion of quote-unquote aid and replaces it with collaboration. Their projects are locally led, community-driven, and designed to create meaningful connections between people who might otherwise never cross paths. Does real change happen when international communities work side by side? Can soft power and human connection do what politics can't? And how does experiencing life in another culture completely shift your view of the world? That's what we're discussing today, and this is Shifting Views with Willis. Okay, Kimberly, welcome to the podcast. Great to have you here.
Thank you. I'm so delighted to be here.
Yeah, pleasure to have you, and thank you for dialing in. This is an unusual one for the viewers because usually we're in the studio, but of course you're dialing in from across the pond, and we're hoping the technology does what it's supposed to do. But it's a real pleasure to have you here. We have spoken briefly before we had this podcast, and it was great to find out everything that Globalware is doing and get a bit of background on what you're set up to do. So really today, I think it would be good for the viewers just to find out a little bit more about what Globalware is about, why you think volunteering and these experiences have such an impact on individuals and kind of creating empathy and bringing people together, and what you think that might do for the world. So I think if we can just start by rowing a little bit backwards, do you remember what the driver was for you for starting Globalware in the first place?
Yeah, sure. I had really been privileged to have a fair amount of travel growing up, but it also meant that when I was traveling overseas for work, which I did a lot, that I was less interested in doing some of the traditional tourist activities. And I just really found myself looking for other ways of engaging in a community or culture to see it from a different perspective. And I found it was really hard to find those kinds of opportunities. And I wasn't in a position where I could take 2.5 years off to do the Peace Corps. I wasn't directly engaged in a church that was doing regular service like that. And so it really came about as a byproduct of all of those things. Yeah.
Right. Okay. And was there a specific in your life? Do you remember a specific incident or event or something that made you think more about kind of like volunteering and creating a bit more empathy about wanting to do good in the world in that sort of sense?
Yeah, it's actually I would say that I grew up doing a fairly traditional amount of service in terms of doing for the Girl Scouts, my school community service, and while I found all of that really meaningful, it wasn't cataclysmic and life-changing and transformational the way it was when doing service overseas and seeing how differently people can live and the kinds of challenges or real beauties that they face. And so in terms of a specific moment, I would say more broadly that every single program has kind of come with a different aha kind of transpirational spark. And I think I had mentioned to you offline when we spoke before that, when the first time I gave a wheelchair to a child in Cambodia, who's a landmine victim, I thought it was really going to be transformative looking at the kid's eyes. And it was actually the mother's eyes that really stayed with me, that as a fellow mother myself, looking at someone's eyes that has their own visions and hopes of what their future is going to look like, and seeing that change, this hope for mobility and independence. Because most of the communities where we operate, we're usually in communities where their standard of living is very different. They often don't have access to running water, electricity, flushing toilets, many times no solid floor other than the bare earth. And so we're being able to see and engage in a way we might not in our regular everyday lives if you're coming from the Western world. And this does not apply to all of our programs. I mean, we're all over Latin America, Southeast Asia, the African continent, but in places like Costa Rica, where the standard of living is quite high. And but in all of those places, They are confronting things that are likely to be different from the people who are serving on our programs. And so that is a specific moment, as an example of an aha where, like, goodness, we all are connected and have these same things as if you're a parent caring for someone or caring for anyone. And yet our lives are so different, and we could connect and engage in this way, even if we don't speak the same language, even if we have no specific job skills that we're bringing to it. We're really at the point where we've designed experiences that are intended to be and that anyone can do them. And so, yes, lots of little inspirational, transformative moments I've been lucky enough to experience.
Okay, so Kimberly, it'd be really good just for the listener's perspective, just to kind of get a bit of an understanding of what Global Aware actually does and what the programs are about, just to kind of set a bit of context into, what volunteers are doing and how they get involved with what you do.
Right. Okay. So we have 26 short term, 1 week programs where people are serving abroad. And it's like signing up for a cruise. You go to the website, you pick the date and the location. And once you get there, the meals, the accommodation, the project materials, our coordinator, all of that is all set. So you're joining one of our projects that's underway and ongoing throughout the year. And these projects look very different in every country. So, for example, we're installing concrete floors in the homes of single moms in Guatemala. We're building Adobe Lerena stoves in Peru. We're building wattle and daub style homes in Kenya. So people are really free to choose what kind of service venture really speaks to them, but they're also going to get a real dose of the local culture because of how we arrange the experience. We are, making tortillas in the Women's Initiative in Guatemala. We are, you're still going to see Machu Picchu when you go to our Peru program, but our focus is more on engaging locally with the community in a way a traditional tourist might not, if they're focused more, getting off and on a bus, going to churches and museums. That looks very different from our experiences. Our accommodations are all over the map, so they're going to be more modest than what they would be on a traditional uh, vacation experience, because we're putting more of our funds to the local staff that we hire to shepherd our volunteers through the process. But they have you know, they certainly always have flushing toilets, running water, electricity, things like that. So that's a little bit
Sure.
of what we do and how we do it. And we tend to work roughly 30 hours during that week and get in a few cultural activities and some free time as well.
Yeah.
And we're really doing this so that people are finding a more digestible way, in terms of time of having some kind of purpose-driven adventure where they're able to complete something in a short period of time. And this also tends to mean that our participants are not always your traditional, if you go to Bali, you're often going with a significant other. In our case, it can be multi-generational travelers. It can be corporate travelers, book clubs, school groups, church groups. So it's really a broader spectrum of people who participate in this. That said, most people who are registering, they're going to be joining a team of roughly 10. So these are small groups. There are weeks not listed, and those weeks are our bigger corporate groups and school groups.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, that was a very long answer to your short
No,
question.
no, that's good. It just gives a bit of context. So it
Yeah,
kind of sounds like a little bit to me like it's almost like vacation with purpose in
sure.
a way, because I instinctively think when I think of Global Aware and when I did my research on you, I sort of think of like a volunteering program, which it sounds like that's what it is. You're going to do some good to
Serve.
experience, immerse yourself in a different environment, all of that good stuff.
That's
But
right.
you seem to be framing it as well in sort of removing the going there to volunteer per se, like with purpose, and more of it's an alternative to a vacation. It's kind of like you're still
Yes.
having that vacation, still having those experiences that you would have on a vacation, but actually the output of it is actually doing some good and achieving something in the world. Is that a fair way to frame it?
That's a fair way of putting it for sure. Because yes, we are there as volunteers delivering some kind of measurable outcome for the local community that will help them. And it's the local community that chooses the projects. We do run these projects through our own criteria of safety and cultural meaning and so forth. But that is exactly what we do. Yes.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, so I'm quite interested in this idea of the challenging the idea of aid, quote unquote. Sometimes that can come with negative connotations, can't it? Particularly
Yes.
from the West, and you kind of get those narratives like the white savior complex and those kind of things that come about, and it's like these Western wealthy people are going over to maybe less affluent parts of the world
Right.
and kind of
Save them.
trying
Right.
saving them and all that good stuff. How do you challenge that from Global Ware's point of view? How do you rebut those kind of claims? And I suppose, how do you empower the local communities rather than impose ideas on them, so to speak?
Yeah. Well, I would first say that we really reject this old charity model of come and help the needy or save the needy because we're working with the local community on projects they've chosen and that they're leading and they're better at and faster at than we are.
Yeah,
So we are really it's a learning opportunity. So while we're serving alongside. We're partners. So, from our perspective, that's the really key piece of keeping an ethical, sustainable program, beginning with the local community and making sure that they're the ones driving it and deciding it, and making sure that these are, we're not aid workers. We're also not traditional tourists. It's kind of a middle path. And so we like to use the word adventure and service, but it is from our perspective, it is learning. We have two main missions that drive everything we do that maybe help lead a little bit better understanding of what drives how we work. So we're everything we do has to fall in one of two categories. We're either promoting cultural awareness, which for us means learning the real beauties and real challenges of a culture, not just that postcard view of it. And that could be seeing how in Guatemala it may be a 2-hour walk to the closest healthcare facility if you don't have access to a vehicle. And the real beauty might be that, the typical Guatemalan spends 4 to 5 hours with their friends, family, and faith relative to someone from a Western country. So our hope is that our volunteers, again, are learning.
yeah,
Um, and then the other piece of it is that we are promoting sustainability so that whatever we're engaging in isn't going to create dependence. So we're not giving out money and candy and, that we're looking for projects that are going to, the local community is going to be even better situated to stand on their own 2 feet because of whatever project we're
sure,
doing.
sure. Yeah, yeah. So it becomes a self-sustaining thing, and a long-term creation of good rather than a handout, so to speak.
That's right.
Yeah, yeah. Which I really like that, and I think it's interesting because when we hear about these kind of interventions, whether that's volunteering or aid or whatever you want to call it, typically we'll hear about it from like a large scale
Right.
project. So we'll hear about government programs or large scale interventions in
Yeah.
war-torn countries or whatever. That's kind of how we hear about on the media. But from your perspective, what have you learned about kind of the power of the
Yeah.
small, well-organized projects, and how that creates lasting change? Like small droplets rather than a massive ocean. Do you see that as more
Right.
effective?
Yeah, so I mean, I would question that obviously both are needed, and we see in our communities where, for example, not having USAID pay for HIV medication is having very real ramifications in the communities where we work. But I, would question that yes, any assumption that only large scale aid moves the needle, that really small, well organized, volunteer powered experiences It's doing two things. It's helping that local community in whatever way they've decided, and it's also helping that volunteers see the world differently and understand that culture so much more empathetically and deeply. So while we are not building hospitals and roads, large scale is not what we're equipped to handle, but because we're having these real human to human moments, we are still in our minds accomplishing a lot, and not all of the accomplishment is in that project. It's just as much what's happening in the minds of the community we're serving alongside and the volunteers, so that hopefully too the local community will continue to see people from other cultures as not just consumers.
Sure,
uh,
sure.
yeah.
Yeah, and this is, I mean, this podcast is called Shifting Views. So, I mean, from that perspective, have you got like key examples of where you've seen mindset shifts, particularly from the participants, so the people that are going over to these places
Yeah.
and they're experiencing something new? Have you seen like a tangible shift by the time they leave that experience, where
Yeah.
enlightenment or some form of change in the way that they are?
Yes, and time again. And an example, you've got a family in Ghana where you pump water from a pump, not from a hose, and bring it by buckets to mix our, think of it as like an adobe or plaster to build with. And I'm just picturing, I remember the first time I seeing a 10-year-old fill up a bucket and slosh it all over, bringing it across the street, and then seeing people boil the water they're drinking, kids bathing in the water that they've had to carry over. And the next time they go back to fill up the bucket, all of a sudden they're really careful with it. When they go back to their hotel, turning their water off in between brushing their teeth, the kind of thing that you could lecture somebody about, hey, you need to conserve water and you need to be careful with it. But somehow getting to experience it, see it firsthand, you don't need any of the lecturing, that this is a way of shifting someone's perspective, giving them a more global view in a very natural, experiential way.
Yeah, yeah, no, yeah, absolutely. Is that tangible? It's so visceral, isn't it? I guess and almost you recognize. So, for example, the water example, you would automatically think about how you would take that for granted. Leaving the water running at home while you're brushing your teeth, or what really simple things, and then you would go somewhere and see like the scarcity and the effort that goes into getting that water and using that water. And I suppose that very visceral experience would instinctively make you think very, very differently,
Yeah.
and take it less for granted, I'm guessing.
Yes.
Or that's what you're seeing from the people that are going, attending your retreats.
Yeah. Yeah. And because there's so many micro moments, there are a lot of things that people are learning. And I'll give you an example of a different thing we do to as part of the structure. We every day begin with an exercise where we discuss some cultural element that, again, a traditional tourist is not likely to know, and discuss it. So, for example, in Costa Rica, we would begin by saying, did you know that in Costa Rica, we don't use street addresses? If you're mailing something to someone, it's basically a paragraph description of how to get there. And that will lead to a discussion in terms of challenging whatever assumptions we have in terms of the way we think should work, or whatever works better, or what people think does or doesn't. And so at the end of the day, we have a reflective exercise, which might be, what is a kindness we observed today, or what is something that you are grateful for today? And so these things are designed to get our participants' minds engaged. And this is where a lot of the views shifting happens, because they are taking a moment to process what we're doing. Because again, this is very short term, to obviously participate in a longer term experience. You're going to have those kinds of things happen more naturally. So in our experiences, we're really trying to build in the structure to get some of that mind shift happening more quickly than it might otherwise.
Yeah, yeah. And what do you want to happen, Kimberly? Like, so people come to these experiences. You see that there's a change in the way that they think about it in that period of time that they're there, and then of course they go back home. And if you add all those experiences together of all the volunteers that come on your program, is there a case of? I mean, what's the output? What do you want to happen in terms of? Is this to kind of bring nations together a little bit? Is it to create more
Yeah.
empathy? What's the
Yeah.
output?
It's actually similar to, the reason, one of the many reasons that President Kennedy began the Peace Corps decades ago was he really wanted to have an educated constituency from which we could choose representatives that could solve cross-cultural problems from having done that um, through service. And if our volunteers are able to go back to their homes and feel empowered because they've seen that they can make a difference, if our volunteers go home and feel more joy and connectedness to humanity, realizing the ways in which we all live according to very similar values in terms of not wanting our children to starve and to be happy and educated and not have bombs flying over their heads. If our volunteers can go home and bring all of this with them, and that causes more joy and more empowerment for them, that's really our goal. And so if we can have more people who might be hesitant and afraid to do this and do it anyway because they're worried, gosh, will I be able to eat the food? Will I know how to do anything? Well, I'm worried about what the risks and the danger are. We are obviously setting up these experiences so that we will keep people safe. But we do see that so many people considering serving abroad have those kinds of fears. Um, in terms of what the risks are. And there is no way to eliminate all risk. Somebody can step on a nail anywhere in the world or twist an ankle, but we are not in war-torn countries and we are not handling bodily fluids. We're not high on ladders and operating heavy equipment and machinery. So this means we can't be in every country where there's real need. But we are specifically seeking out those communities that do have a real need, that are open arms with us, so that the volunteers go home with new perspective. And our hope is once they've done so, they may go first to a country that's closer to their home country. Having experienced it the first time, almost all of them are willing to go much further afield and get much further from their home country, having gotten past that initial hesitation that we see so frequently.
Yeah. I mean, for me, it's well researched and well documented that travel and experiences does change the way that you think
Yeah.
about stuff. That's why students take gap years. It's why people go on, expeditions and all sorts of things, because it reframes the way that you think about the stuff, how you see other people, how you connect with people, your confidence,
Mhm.
your skills. There's so many factors that all the evidence shows that that's there. And I think from the risk point of view, I mean, as you say, there's risk in going on vacation anywhere, flying you're doing anything. There's always a risk of something, isn't there? But I think there's it's that framing of if I'm going to take some time out and I'm going to travel somewhere and I want to experience something in the same way that I would if I went on any holiday, any vacation. Um, but in doing this, I can actually do some good. I can learn something. I can broaden my horizons, but maybe I can make something better for another community. There's something quite powerful in that message, isn't there? Do you think that message is out there enough? Are there enough organizations like yourself that are really kind of trying to drive this, more empathetic way of living and, and caring about others?
Well, we do feel like we've seen a growing trend in this area. And more specifically, we've seen it in corporate groups and employers where they are willing to support their employees as part of their corporate social responsibility. And so, for example, we've seen employers say, hey, we are going to allow contribution matching toward the charity of your choice. We're going to give you not just however many days of vacation, but we'll give you 5 extra days that we'll pay for if it's done for service, whether at home or abroad. So we've seen growth in that area. Of course, we'd love to see more. And, there's really been an evolution in the last, I'd say, 25 years, where I would say maybe from around 2010 to 2018, there was a fair amount of press over some organizations that were not doing things ethically, whether they were putting vulnerable children directly in contact with people that they shouldn't have, or um, acting as heroes rather than partners in local communities. And so we've certainly seen things shift, and we really saw a huge disruption during COVID when so many borders were closed. So, in terms of growth and trends, it's really been a roller coaster. But right now, we're seeing a lot of corporations support this kind of effort, allowing their employees to decide where they want to give and in what way they want to give. And that's been wonderful to see.
Yeah, that's really interesting point you make there as well regarding kind of the narrative and the media backing, because you're right, from a corporation point of view, we do hear about a lot of the bad stuff, in terms of, how they farm materials or sweatshops in China or whatever. We hear all of this kind of negative stuff, but often you don't really hear the positive side of it, of a corporation, actively pushing and trying to do something interesting. And as to your point, incentivizing employees to take a vacation in a certain way and do some good or whatever. So I suppose there's a role there, isn't there, for a wider kind of narrative to be
Mhm.
kind of educating people on the benefits of this sort of approach.
Yeah, and the interesting side of what the benefits are is obviously the local community where we're serving is benefited, and hopefully you're getting a sense from what I'm saying how much the volunteer gets out of
Sure.
serving, but also employers get not only return staff that feel particularly grateful for their own lives and the standard of living, but they also feel again empowered and connected. So it's great PR for the company. So really, when it comes to whether it's a win-win, it's really win-win-win-win. Everyone's winning.
Yeah.
It is at a cost. I think it's something I may not have mentioned at the beginning. People pay to participate. And that's what hires all of our local staff, so that we're not replacing people's paid jobs, but continuing employment in those communities. So that's an essential component
Yeah, sure.
I mean, people can obviously give in any way. Whether it's in their own home communities, and we definitely think service should start at home, help your neighbor. And then to the extent you have time, ability, and resources, being able to look beyond uh, what is home to you, so that you can get those other perspectives that are hard to get when you don't change your environment.
Yeah. I mean, for me, Kimberly, it's a no-brainer. I mean, you say like emphasizing that people kind of pay for these experiences, but for me, of course they do, because I mean, in exactly the same way that you would pay, I've traveled all over the place and I've had lots of wonderful experiences, but in all of those situations, I've paid to do that because I want to have that experience, right? For me, it's a life event, So you've got the fun bit of kind of like almost the holiday vacation side of it. You've got the side of kind of meeting all of these different people, communities, new friends for life, all of that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But you've also got the experience, which for me you can't. I think it's so important. You can't buy this stuff in that sort of sense. Life experience is something that's so innate, and it's something that we all need. We need to see
Yeah.
things and touch things and be involved in things, because that's what we take with us moving forward. It's what informs our direction, our values, who we become, isn't it? So
Yeah.
I think there just needs to be so much more kind of thought in that kind of sense when people are considering, okay, what am I doing with my year when I'm not working and I'm going to go away and have a break of whatever sort? What can I do with that break other than like looking for the enjoyment and the relaxation element of it, if you like? But what can I do with it? What can I gain from it? And how can somebody else gain from me from it? That's very powerful, is it not?
It is powerful, and it really is. I really encourage people to do this for selfish reasons.
Yeah.
That because of what it does for the person. Occasionally we'll find people who will, maybe understandably ask, why would I have to pay to volunteer for someone? But the communities where we work, they're having trouble feeding their own families, so they don't have
Sure.
the ability to feed others, and they're our only source of funding. We don't have any sort of government grants of any kind. So I agree. I think that you just, anybody has to decide what is worth a value to them that they're willing to pay for, and that we have our repeat volunteers are such a huge percent of our volunteers that we know that it is something that lights a fire under people when they do it. Um, and they see the value. And again, I think it would be wrong if we didn't acknowledge that this does as much or more for the volunteer than the person along whom we're serving, because again, they're usually much better and faster at everything we do.
Yeah.
Although there is a financial component where a lot of times the materials that we're using aren't things that people would be able to get otherwise, just in terms of material resources. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
but it's
Sure.
good to be able to see that the actual uh, 3D version of what you've done in terms of empowerment in a productivity focused culture that can really make you feel em- emboldened to do more.
Yeah, sure. Kimberly, I really wanted to get your take on quote unquote soft power, which is something that I'm a huge advocate of. I'm from the music world originally, and I see a lot of soft power in the arts and the music, and how that affects the way that other people think about a country or a nation, particularly the US and the UK, where we export a lot of arts and music and that kind of stuff. What an artist can do and an impact an artist can have on someone globally is profound over what politics can do and stuff. But relating that to what you do you see that there's a real soft power in kind of that the volunteering and the experiences that you offer to your participants, and just building on that soft power piece? Do you
Mhm.
see that there's a way you can use that to shape how people see the West, but also how the West sees other nations?
Yeah, yeah, that is a really important outcome with our programs. There was a Brookings Institute study from about 15 years ago that was looking at soft power versus hard power in the US, and looking at fully loaded. At the time, we were spending around $400,000 a year per soldier in the field, and that's their, medical care, their uniforms, their machine gun, the tank, all that.
Mm,
And we were spending about $16,000 a year on our Peace Corps volunteers in the field, whether, they might be teaching in Tanzania for 2.5 years. And they were trying to look at, for that investment, what are we getting out? And, if you've got a community in Afghanistan that has had a teacher there for 2.5 years, and now they have warm fuzzies and think about the US citizens they know as being people who are helping them and who want to get to know them, and they don't feel like bombing them, what is
mm,
that worth? And they really had a hard time monetizing the outcome. But the big upshot was that we had been underutilizing soft power. It's harder to measure, but but it has such a deep, long impact. And our volunteers, because they may be there short term, yet there's another group coming a couple weeks later, there is that continuing presence, so that those local communities don't look at people from the West as just, your typical cruise passenger getting off the boat in a group of 100 to buy a souvenir, trampling over the locals and eating only at the chain restaurants. This is a very different interaction. So certainly in the communities where we serve, we know that the joy that we mutually have, that the view they have of the U.S. looks different, because we are, our clothes are getting muddy. We're standing beside them. We're eating together. We're singing together. We're dancing together. Um, so that soft power is, even if it's not a stated goal, it's a very powerful outcome. Yeah.
Yeah, well, it's almost by default, isn't it? I
Yes.
think, but in what you're doing, I mean, I've never really understood, and I won't get too much into it because I don't want to get into politics, really. But I've never really understood like the cut of aid. You mentioned USAID earlier on, and
Yeah.
in the
It's
UK, we've got
devastating.
we cut international aid a couple of budgets back, and for me, that's such a detrimental step because it actually doesn't achieve anything positive in that sort of the aid is the soft power. If the more that we can help, the more that we can support, the more that people can stay in their own home,
Um,
stay in their own country, manage and thrive and live. And, you know, if you want to deal with things like migration and people moving across borders and things like that, don't take away any resource from them. Give them resource, give them support so that they can stay there and make something. That seems to be a no-brainer to me. But you know,
yeah.
politics is rarely
Yeah,
rarely
I've even
logical.
seen it. Yeah, we even the destruction of various resources, food and family planning things that have been destroyed rather than distributed. It's really head shaking some of what's happening. But it does. It's a beautiful thing for an individual to see that you don't have to wait for government to do something. You don't have to quit your job or be wealthy to really shift someone's life perspective, and that whatever's happening in the government, whether you agree or disagree, in terms of your own relationship with a community and a culture, that you can still very easily give yourself more in terms of that mental capacity of understanding.
Sure, sure. And that leads nicely onto my final question, Kimberly, in terms of the shifting of perspectives, which is if there's people listening to this that haven't ever traveled, for example, to a more developing country, they've never been on a non-traditional holiday, for example, what lessons do you think from Globe Aware can they apply in their own lives or maybe in their own businesses to make them think a little bit more globally, a little bit more sustainably, a little bit more compassionately? So they haven't done this, but are there things that they could do now,
Yeah.
but you know, just to
Well,
think a bit differently?
I would just really encourage everyone to think beyond whatever their uh, essential borders are right now, whether there's as somebody just doesn't travel outside of their own hometown, whatever that traditional border is, that they challenge themselves this year to try and go beyond whatever that border is, whether it's physically or in politics, healthcare, community design, that if they look past what their norm is and be open to viewing what are the challenges and the beauties of that border beyond, that they are only going to be improved by having done that, by having challenged themselves. And it does not have to be in another nation, but so many of us, we get used to our bubble between the home and a grocery store and work, and we're shorting ourselves in terms of
Sure.
joy and understanding by doing that. And it can take a challenge. It can take actually saying, I am going to do this. I'm going to make a goal to go beyond that. And you'll only gain. You'll
Yeah.
only gain.
Sure. And Kimberly, just finally, what keeps driving you? What do you have a vision? Do you have a thing that what does the future look like? Is what keeps you pushing this forward?
Well, certainly our communities are always changing, growing, and we are always added programs. Um, and I love seeing, as particularly somebody who doubted whether or not they can do this, what they come back with. And that has always been a real motivator for me when I get to see that, when people come back and have the same joys that I got to see. That's a real motivator. So the future for me, like an ideal thing would be the kinds of people who might not think they would ever do this, having them try it. That to me is an objective I've always had, is those people who just think they can't do it, seeing them do it.
Yeah. No, that's lovely. Kimberly, so if people are listening to this and they think about, "Do you know what, I want to take a step, I want to have a go at this, I want to find out what it's all about," what's the first steps? Where should they go? What should they do?
Yes, and they do. So we're everywhere you look online with the words Globe Aware. So, of course, our website, we have a podcast channel, YouTube channel, of course, Facebook, Instagram, all the things.
Yeah.
And we have a lot of content there that is applicable, even if you aren't wanting to serve with Globalware. If you're wanting to know how to fill out your tourist card for Cuba or your Zimbabwe visa, or what do the toilets look like in the hill tribes of Thailand, we try and have content out there that will hopefully be of service to people just even thinking about going beyond their borders. So hope you'll
Yeah.
check us out.
Yeah, no, well, I mean, I would say please do for people that are listening to this. I had a good look at what Globalware was doing because obviously Kimberly was coming on the podcast. But I've always been really an advocate of putting yourself in positions which, one, you're not used to being in, pushing your own boundaries. It's like personal challenge,
Yeah.
growing yourself, growing your mindset, but also doing some good. There's a real power in that, and it'll just make you a better person. And maybe you start doing that even just in your own community, just to kind of dip your toe into like doing a volunteer thing or trying something out and kind of just spreading out. You don't have to go full hog if you're that terrified, but please at least have a look and look at what the opportunities are, because actually it's good for everyone, and maybe we can all be a little bit more empathetic if we can open our eyes to a wider experience. Kimberly, this has been so interesting. I really appreciate you coming on the podcast and telling us about what you do. And I think the work you do is fantastic. So thank you for pushing that forward. And I hope you continue to have success in all the projects you do. I'm sure it's beneficial for everyone involved. So I really appreciate it. Thank you for coming on the show today.
Thank you so much, Wayne. I really appreciate it.
Thanks very much. All the best.